Well, once again, good morning, Professor. Good morning, members of the panel, Dr. Mungenia, Dr. Isaacs. Good morning, my supervisor, Dr. Greg Tosin, and good morning, the learning coordinator, Dr. Toga, and of course, good morning to my learned Da Vinci colleagues. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present my proposal doctoral defense this morning, and the proposed title of my defense of my thesis is a conceptual business incubator framework for junior mineral exploration and development with a Southern African focus. I'd like to emphasize why I'm using the word a conceptual framework, in that there is very little or no theory in this particular area, and this theory will need to be generated from the research and from practice. And then secondly, it is a more practical and perhaps more useful approach to adopt in industry application, and I hope this will be evident as I go through the presentation. So this is a new slide on slide 2, and my slight apologies to it, panel, that why I incorporated this. One of our fellow colleagues, Gary Greef, on the doctorate program sent this to me, and this is the front page of the Financial Mail of a couple of weeks ago, which talks about junior mining being in descent in South Africa, and my presentation is very much trying to do the opposite of this, make it a sunrise industry. And interestingly, they quote as their subtitle a very famous Dylan Thomas poem about rage against the dying of the light. And I thought, seeing they've done this, and seeing it's a very useful backdrop for my presentation, I'd just like to read the last verse of that poem. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So my agenda for the presentation is, firstly, I'm going to start with the research context, then move on to the selection of the research problem, a high-level overview of my preliminary research, literature review, before moving on to my research philosophy, design, and methodology. I'll then move on to the limitations of the study and the significance of the study before making some concluding thoughts. So firstly, the research context. We are all trying to achieve a sustainable development scenario. This is something that all governments around the world wish to do, and United Nations wishes to do it as well. However, in order to achieve even the most conservative of these scenarios, approximately 19 to 42 times more minerals will need to be produced. 42 times more lithium, 25 times more graphite, 21 times more cobalt, 19 times more nickel, and the list goes on. Otherwise, we'll never be able to achieve sustainable development scenarios and save our planet for future generations. However, if one looks at where financing is coming in to achieve this sustainable development scenario, capital expenditures are only up 18% across the world. Market capitalizations are only up 7%, and that's an important number because generally mining companies raise capital for new projects. And here's an interesting fact that I learned the other day, that the famous AI tech giant is worth $4 trillion, and all the mining companies in the world are worth less than half of that number. So it just shows the huge gap there is in order to fund the fifth industrial revolution, which I'm going to talk about momentarily, and more importantly, the sustainable development scenario. So who finds all of these mines? Well, research has shown that over 60% of commercial discoveries, i.e. what we're looking for, are found by junior miners. And what is a junior miner? There are many different definitions, but the most common one is a company which is chiefly focused on prospecting, exploration, and techno-economic studies, and is worth less than $100 million. So what is the funding looking like for these juniors? And this is a graph taken from the Toronto Stock Exchange, and I'm using this as a proxy for fundraising for juniors. And why am I doing this? That approximately 1,400 of the world's 2,800 juniors are listed on the venture capital exchange of the Toronto Stock Exchange. And you can see with my red arrow that funding for juniors, which are the main engine of discovery for our critical minerals, is actually declining. So where are these minerals found? These minerals are found all over the world, but Africa is absolutely pivotal and central to the energy transition. And you can see the comment on the right hand of the screen from the UN Trade and Development Secretary General. But looking at the graph there, you can see that over 70% of the world's manganese, it comes from Africa. 70% of the world's cobalt. Over 60% of the world's platinum group minerals come from Africa. And this slide doesn't even talk about prospectivity. That Africa is often viewed as the unexplored continent compared to elsewhere, and therefore the potential for Africa is so much more. So, putting this all together, the first comment I'd like to make is the vast majority of juniors follow an ad hoc approach, and over 90% of them fail. So if over 90% of them fail, and we've got to try and achieve these sustainability scenarios, we've got to do something different. So in my preliminary research, what I found is that there are only 3 fully integrated mining business incubators, and none of these are in Africa. All 3 of these integrators, one which is based in Ireland and 2 which are based in Canada, have been working for several decades, and chiefly over 75% of them have produced successful companies. If I look at the 162 group, that's been going for over 60 years and has basically given birth to over 30 companies. The Hunter Dickinson group in Canada has given birth to over 19 companies, and the Lundin group, just 14, but they have a much higher market capitalization of $11 billion. And research suggests that these incubators de-risk, stimulate, and fast-track the mineral exploration and development process. And much has been written on business incubators, and I'm sure everybody will be familiar with incubation in the tech space, particularly around artificial intelligence at the moment, and also in the medical space, particularly around the development of new medicines, and the development of the COVID vaccines was a great example of that. But there is very, very little specific research in the area of a fully integrated mining business incubator. And what that is defined as is taking a mineral idea from basically birth to its commercial conclusion. So the selection of the research problem. Why am I doing this? Why do I believe this is important? Well, firstly, I have a background in geology. I did my degree in mining and exploration geology many, many years ago. I have an MBA where I looked at the assessment and impact of risk in the selection of new mining projects for De Beers. I spent 20 years with a major working in the exploration, mining and strategy area, and I'm now running my 4th listed junior. And I've had both successes and failures. And I'm coming towards the end of my career now. And what I wanted to do was to leave a legacy for future mining entrepreneurs in Southern Africa. Based on my 40 years career in the industry and basically putting the cream on by doing this particular research. Why is this important though? Not just from my own legacy perspective, in that only 5 listed juniors are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. I've already mentioned that 1,400 are listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and there are about 2,500 listed globally. If you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you'll see the decline of our share of global exploration expenditure. The government is targeting 5%. Well, we've sadly been dropping, and we're hovering round about 1%. So if we want to stimulate mining investment in South Africa, and changing the law is well outside of my gamut and kind of pay grade, I propose to do this study, and hopefully by doing this study, we'll create more mining entrepreneurs in Africa, African mining entrepreneurs, and therefore start to stimulate the economy. So why is this important for the fifth industrial revolution? Because often many people, when I talk to them about this, says, well, nothing could, mining and the fifth industrial revolution are poles apart. They're irrelevant to each other. Well, they're not. Because mining is essential for the fifth industrial revolution, because without it, there will be no machines. There'll be none of the minerals, which I spoke about on slide number 4. However, the challenge for the mining industry is to become a lot more internalized, I think is probably the best word, in terms of their environmental practices, their social management practices, and their ethical impacts to ensure a sustainable and responsible development. The other side of the coin on this is that companies are using AI in the mining space, and probably one of the most famous is a company called Kobold, which my little company is trying to emulate. It's a $3 billion company, exploration company, funded by Jack Ma, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates, which has found a large copper deposit in northern Zambia. We're in an area which has been mined for several decades, and they've been using artificial intelligence on exploration data to find this new deposit. And clearly, this is the way to go in exploration. So what are my research aims and objectives? Well, my research problem statement is the absence of a fully integrated junior mineral exploration and development business incubator for Southern Africa. And therefore, my research aim is to develop a conceptual business incubator framework for junior mineral exploration development for Southern Africa. I have 3 research objectives. Firstly, to critically evaluate how juniors discover and develop mines. Secondly, to determine the reasons and the extent of the shortcomings of juniors and why so many of them actually fail. And then finally, to determine whether the 3 identified integrated mining incubators, which I've mentioned previously, collectively known as the named integrators, are more successful than standalone junior companies in discovering and developing mines. This is my thesis framework, and it very much follows the requirements given by Da Vinci. I've outlined my research questions already. This proposal defense is on my chapter 1 and chapter 3. I've already started making good way with my literature review, absolutely fascinating area. And once I follow the due process, as I understand, of completing what I'm doing now, receiving ethical clearance and then presenting my literature review, I can get on with the data collection and analysis, findings and discussions, and recommendations. So what does my preliminary literature review tell me? Well, firstly, the literature review identifies 5 different types of incubators: university, government, corporate, private investment, and integrated. The literature also talks about several benefits these incubators provide, such as technology and AI, I've mentioned this one already, risk mitigation, funding access, and then ESG compliance. However, the literature is also quite critical of the application of incubator theory in the mining space, particularly because of long development cycles. It can take 10 years to develop a mine from a discovery, and equally, it could take a long period of time from going onto the ground to be making that discovery. Secondly, capital intensity. Mines typically cost in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the commodity and mine type to develop. And regulatory hurdles. I'm familiar with several industries, but I've worked in the mining industry for all of my life, and I think we probably have more regulatory hurdles than anyone else. The literature is very strong on technical components of exploration and mine development, and to some extent financing in the area of exploration and mine development. However, there is a gap in the area in which I would like to focus on. So these are a summary of some of the key papers which I've looked at. The first paper looked at describing the types of assistance a mining incubator can provide: financial, technical, mentorship particularly important to stimulate innovation and expedite project development. Technology development was a common area of some of the papers in terms of particularly like advanced geophysics, artificial intelligence, and sustainable mining practices. Then thirdly, there are some critics of this approach, and my third bullet talks to one of them, which talks about long lead times and high capital intensity, which makes it a challenge for rapid acceleration. Coming closer to home, Dr. Mike Seeger, who did his doctorate at the University of the Witwatersrand, and is a good friend of mine, he developed a game plan where he used game theory to see how junior companies can try and establish and market-winning and globally competitive ways. And then finally, Sykes and Trench, and Trench was a colleague of mine at the Royal School of Mines 40 years ago, has done a lot of work in the area of developing a business case for greenfield exploration. So summarizing all of this, my preliminary research has identified only 3 fully integrated incubators. There is very little academic research on this particular concept, and I hope that my research will actually begin to fill this gap and lead to other research gaps in this area. So what is my research philosophy? Well, I started off with identifying a personal philosophy, and a slight kind of aside on this. I shared this with a good friend of mine who has a doctorate, and he did his doctorate about 20 years ago. And he thought this particular section and focus in the proposal was so important, and he wished he did this now. So compliments, gentlemen, for giving such a strong emphasis on this. I identified my personal philosophy as being that of a stoic pragmatist. I look at practical results along with emotional resilience and acceptance. And interestingly enough, I did some research on this, and I found that people who've been in the business, mineral exploration business, as long as I've been, tend to be stoic pragmatists. So it's a fascinating area. My ontology is that of a relativist and a subjective. I do have a background in the natural scientist, where I have written papers, but from a deductive perspective. But in the social sciences, I'm very much more of a relativist and subjectivist. My epistemology is that of an interpretivist and a constructivist, where I look at how individuals interpret the world and how they actually construct the world. It goes, following from the title of my thesis, it follows that my research approach is inductive and my research strategy is qualitative. From a data collection perspective, I'm going to focus on between 8 and 12 semi-structured interviews being my primary source of data collection, and I'll be triangulating this with using historical analysis of mining success and integrative mining incubators from a documentary perspective. And finally, I'm going to draw all this together in terms of a thematic analysis. So here are some of my example questions. On the right-hand side, I've given a couple of pictures. Dr. John Teeling is my chairman. He's probably one of the world's most prolific mining entrepreneurs. And Lucas Lundin, who I had the pleasure of meeting before he passed on, also a phenomenal mining entrepreneur. So here are some of the example questions. Is how did you conceive of the idea of exploring in a specific area? It might sound very obvious. It's an open question, but I think it will reveal some very interesting answers. What internal factors cause junior companies to fail? Are you familiar with the concept of an integrated mining business incubator? What types of support do you think this incubator can provide? And would it have benefited your company during its formative stages? And if you were to begin your journey in Southern Africa, what key advice would you offer? Ethical considerations are obviously vital in any research approach, but they're probably even more vital in the mining industry, as it's seen as a political hot potato, not just in South Africa, but my title talks to Southern Africa, which encompasses Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe too. Informed consent is vital, as is voluntary participation. Confidentiality and data protection is absolutely critical, because not only are we dealing with companies which have to abide by the company law of the country, but also very strict stock exchange regulations too as well. I in particular have to be aware of potential study bias and conflicts of interest. I've worked in this area for several decades, and I'm currently running a small junior, so that's something that I'm going to have to watch very, very carefully, and something which has become more and more to the fore over the last few years is ensuring diverse perspectives, not just ensuring the perspectives of people who look like me. And then, of course, the importance of environmental sustainability. In the mining industry, we call this the social license to operate in your environment. So what are the limitations of my study? Obviously, I think the first one, it's a relatively small population. My population is defined as mining entrepreneurs who've had 2 or more successes, and there are not many of them. So if one does the research on this, you probably only find a few dozen in the world who are currently living at the moment. And this may be perceived as a potential limitation. Secondly, I've already emphasized the importance of watching my background in this area. However, I hope to overcome this by a design approach that integrates the strengths of interviewing between 8 and 12 serial mining entrepreneurs, with triangulating that with looking at secondary data sets of companies which have been successful, and the corollary of that too as well, companies which have failed. So what is the significance of the study? The graphic on the right-hand side talks about the impact of mining in Africa. I think my introductory slides talk about the importance of mining to the sustainable development scenario. And later on in my presentation, I've actually spoken about the importance of mining to the 5th Industrial Revolution. So I hope this study will assist junior miners in advancing their projects to a commercial conclusion. I hope that it will significantly de-risk many variables that contribute to project failure. I've also had the opportunity, as I run a listed company, to discuss this body of work with officials from Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, and they've all shown great interest. And it's not surprising, because the NDP of 2030 in our country encourages the people of South Africa to be creative in growing the economy. And something which is very, very close to my heart is the African Union Mining Vision 2009, which supports local entrepreneurship. Now, if we want to generate African mining companies, we have to find a way of not being reliant on overseas capital, because obviously if it's overseas capital, it'll be overseas ownership unless it's regulated. And I'm looking here at entrepreneurial development. So if we can do something to try and create a more entrepreneurial environment and a more entrepreneurial framework for junior miners in this country, we'll actually then start to create more local ownership in that area. Then we all know that mining has a significant multiplier effect of 7 to 10 times the value, because of all the services and other things mines actually require to survive. So, learned panel, colleagues from Da Vinci, to summarize my proposal defense, if I look at the graphic on the right-hand side, you start off with 1,000 geological deposits, you have 100 exploration projects, 10 feasibility studies, and 1 producing mine. I would think that this is going to change with the advent of artificial intelligence, but it also we can contribute to de-risking this by doing such a study. So my proposal outlines a framework, a conceptual framework for a business incubator for junior mineral exploration and development in Southern Africa. And it emphasizes the importance of mining in the local economy and how junior miners can significantly contribute to success, despite what the Financial Mail and the 2 articles in that Financial Mail actually said. The research will address the absence of a fully integrated business incubator, and my proposal outlines the research design, philosophy, methodology, and data collection methods. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, this proposal examines the challenges faced by junior miners, and by drawing on lessons from successful mining incubators, successful companies and failed companies, this study aims to enhance the commercial success of these ventures. Thank you very much indeed for your time and consideration. And Professor Singh, I hand the floor back to you.
James, thank you very much for a well-articulated and presented discussion here on your proposal. I will come back to you in a second. Keep your presentation on, James. Don't unshare it. There may be questions related to the presentation. At this